What's up, everyone? We've got another awesome show for you here today. I'm talking with my friend Jim Young, who also goes by the Centered Coach, and we are talking about intimacy. We're talking about Jim's journey with mental health, how we can be more intimate, what does intimacy actually mean, what is the role of love in all of this, how do we love ourselves more, how do we create more love in the relationships that we care about, and really how do we open up and make things more available to us as guys and as people out there in the world. We talk about a lot of other stuff as well, but I'll leave that for you in the show. Let's get after it.
Welcome to The Mandate, a show featuring intimate conversations about men's mental health, masculinity, and identity. We bring you stories to inspire you, experts to guide you, and the tools you need to become the man you truly want to be. It's time to sit back, relax, and open up. Live from the Mandate Studio in Austin, Texas, here's your host, Adam Hoffman.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's Mandate. I am joined by Jim Young, and we are going to talk about intimacy. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Thanks for being here and coming to hang out on this afternoon-ish, I think, for most of us. Lunchtime conversations about intimacy are my favorite, and I say that like I have them all the time, which I don't, but that's why I'm so excited to talk to Jim today. So Jim also goes by the Centered Coach. He is a dad of 3 ridiculous teens, a coach who helps men dare their way past outdated archetypes, and a creative organizational facilitator who loves the color teal. We might get into teal a little bit today. If you find yourself in Western Massachusetts outside of the pandemic times, you can catch Jim performing regularly in improv comedy shows with his team, Not in Charge. So with that, say hello to Jim. Thanks for being here.
Adam, thanks a lot for having me. When I saw your show for the first time and I saw you talk about having intimate conversations, I was like, oh, cool. That's a place to go. So really, really excited to be here.
Yeah, and no better. I know we originally had it scheduled for last week. It was going to be in the evening, kind of set the mood. Evening time tends to be, at least where my mind goes for intimacy, but like no reason you can't be intimate around lunch too, right?
Intimate lunchtime is sounding perfect for me today. So yeah, absolutely. Let's have an intimate lunch. If you're out there eating your lunch, just make a little extra space on your plate for some intimacy.
There you go. And maybe in the future, you and I will start the intimate lunch club. That could be our tandem experience.
I think there's a movie waiting to be born from that as well. Sounds like
What is the genre of this movie that you're imagining?
Oh, well, it's totally a takeoff on The Breakfast Club. So it's kind of like Teen Angst as well. You're bringing that into the mix. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
God, I want to go and design this whole show right now. It's like, who's going to play who? What are the other characters? We'll maybe have to come back to that another time. But I'd love to know, like, how are you doing? I know you guys are getting some weather up there this week, kind of like we were last week.
Yeah, this morning I thought we were going to have to postpone again because of power outages, but thankfully we're up and running. Yeah, I mean, how am I doing right now? I mean, I think I'm riding the waves, to be honest. Fighting my way through the end of the pandemic winter and dealing with lots of life events, both joyous and grief-filled, and navigating relationships and work and all sorts of things, and just feeling fully alive. I'll say that. And it's all good. Like it's not always easy. And there's just a lot of richness going on in the world today for me.
What do you find helps you the most come back to some version of a centered point for you? You're riding this wave. Some days it's bigger up and it is down, vice versa. What helps you kind of come back to center?
I suppose as the Centered Coach, I should have a good answer for this one. Is that true?
Maybe not. No judgment here.
Yeah. But seriously, there's really 2 things that jumped right to mind, and sort of interleaved with one another. I picked up meditation as a practice a couple of years ago, and have stayed with it. I'd tried it out multiple times in the past, but I couldn't stick with it because I thought it was, I have to sit on a cushion and be silent. And I was no good at that, as it turns out, or I couldn't figure out how to keep that. And I started doing guided meditation, and that's really helped me. So it just gives me a place every day where I get to stop, thinking, turn my brain off, listen to some wisdom, and just settle in and breathe. So that's one. And then the other thing is I'm a habit person. I'm a big fan of James Clear's work on that. Atomic Habits is one of my favorite books, and I really started adopting habits to say, what are the things that are going to keep me moving in the direction that I want to and feel grounded? And some of that literally is like moving, having a gratitude practice that I exercise every day. Um, Doing different types of growth, and I'll change those habits from time to time, but really just knowing like I've got a foundation. These are the things that I'm going to do all the time to care for me first so that I can then be out there for other people.
Got it. If you could only pick one of those habits that you've kind of developed
Mhm.
to carry forward, you had to let the rest of them go. What's the number one thing that you would hold on to?
Gratitude, 100%.
Mm,
And when I am in the mindset of gratitude, everything shifts. And I had a friend of mine teach me this simple trick last year. I think it was early on in 2020. She invited me, instead of saying I have to say I get to. So I have to do the laundry versus I get to, which means I don't have to pick up my laundry and bring it to some other place far away from my home, or I have enough clothes that I need to wash them. I have it's a whole different perspective for me, and that's one of the tricks. But yeah, just being grateful helps me get out of feeling like a victim or um, lots of negative energy.
I will have to try that on with doing the dishes. I get to do the dishes today. I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna work on that. I'm gonna work on that. I understand the concept. I like it a lot. There are just certain things where it's kind of like, do I really get to do this? And but that the framing that you just gave is super helpful, in that it makes you think about the privilege or the gratitude that you have for being what enables you to do that thing in the first place. You almost get past the fact that like, oh, it's laundry, blah, versus I have all these. I'm fortunate enough to have all these clothes and to have a washer and dryer that has running water, hopefully still for you guys to do laundry in. Things like that that we can really take for granted.
Yeah, I love that you brought the word privilege into it because that's totally it, right? And I mean, here we are, a couple of white guys, you know, privileged, able-bodied, like there's probably lots of categories that you could label onto me. White, middle class, able-bodied, straight man, a couple others you could probably throw on there. Is like that puts me like way up here in terms of privilege. And so when it's like I have to pay my taxes, it's like no, I get to pay my taxes. That is right for me, and I think it's right for the world. And I could complain about it, or I could just pay my taxes and keep going.
Yeah, that makes me think of another part of it too, is that complaining, victimizing ourselves, those actions require so much energy, whether they're mostly mental, but also physical. It's like gratitude, where that really brings in energy into the picture as opposed to take it away. And that's a concept that I try to think about, is like what is sucking my energy, what is giving me energy, and out into the world as well. And how can I be more conscious of those things?
Yeah, there's that dark and light aspect. And I think when I'm not in that place of gratitude, when I'm instead, woe is me, all these problems that I have, I shrink down, I get dark, and I'm not really of use to anybody, including myself. And when I get in those worst places, I'll do the gratitude ABCs. Let's start going through the alphabet. I'm grateful for avocados, grateful for my bed. I'm grateful for, just keep going through the list. And by the time I get to, usually, I don't get past like maybe like in a really bad situation, I have to get to like M before I can unwind myself. I'm like, all right, I'm fine. I'm just having a moment here.
The gratitude ABCs, I've literally never heard of that, and it is genius. Did you make this up or get it from somewhere?
I got it from somewhere. I actually did a bunch of recovery work in Al-Anon. I have a lot of alcoholics in my family and in my life over the years. And one of the amazing gifts that I got from there was the gratitude ABC. Somebody mentioned it one day, and I was like, oh, I need that. And I've used it, throughout the years since then. And it's such a simple way to reframe, just to switch my mindset.
Wow, I love that. All right, I think we can just end the show now. We're good. I've got the takeaway. I think we can all go back to doing some ABCs right now.
Thanks for
No, but
having me.
yeah, exactly. In all seriousness, though, I'm curious. You've always been somebody that struck me as you're very aware, conscious, intentional with this stuff. Has that always been that way? What has your journey been like with your own mental health and well being?
Yeah, it definitely has not always been that way. In fact, a lot of times what I'll describe to people who I know now but didn't know before is, if you knew me 10 years ago, you would not really recognize me because I basically had my head in the sand, to be polite. I was not focused on things like gratitude or things like just being aware of what's going on for me, like my emotional awareness, what's going on in my relationships. Really, the thing that changed for me was my divorce, and that was my wake up call. I could have gone in a couple directions. I could have gone down a depressive path, which exists. There's a steady thread of that in my family, a lot of depression. And I had moments during that process where I was like, "Oh shit, I don't feel like getting out of bed. I feel horrible." And the first thing that I did, and I've looked back over the years, and I realized like I went through this what looks like a systematic um, rebuild of sorts. There wasn't really a system in place. It just I kind of kept making the right choices and getting the right influences. But it started with mental health work. I had never done therapy work in my life, and I realized like I'm in a bad way right now, and I don't even know why. And I started seeing a therapist when I was probably 42 years old. I think was the first time I walked into therapy, and it was so good. Like it saved me because I probably would have started to make a bunch of bad choices. I would have just stayed in this place of like victimhood or my life sucks or I don't want to try. That was a distinct possibility. So doing that work and then the recovery work in Al-Anon was another piece. It's a big piece of my mental health and spiritual health.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing all that. I'm curious, getting into therapy, was that a hard decision for you to make?
Um, yes and no. I kind of knew that if I didn't do something, that things were not going to be so good for me. So that got me over the hump of the hard part, which was the stigma that I felt. Like I had this story in my head that going to therapy made you weak, and you're not allowed to be weak. You're just supposed to figure it all out. Like especially as the way that I understood masculinity and manhood in the way that I was raised, the community that I grew up in. Um, you don't need help. Help is a four-letter word, and that makes you all sorts of things you don't want to be called.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And I mean, that's a pretty consistent theme from the guys that I've talked about. And what's also interesting, though, is the more that I've talked about it with people in general, it's not just unique to guys. It's that the whole stigma that's surrounding it is like, oh, well, I have to be crazy to go into therapy. It's kind of like, no, if you just had a moment, you woke up and you're like, I could use some extra help right now. I mean, that's a great reason to go and look into a coach, a therapist, a counselor. Any of those options are great. Community. I mean, you mentioned Al-Anon, and same thing with some stuff in my family. I've been through Al-Anon meetings, Narcotics Anonymous meetings, all that
Mhm.
stuff, and like the community that comes with that, and the release that you get from just being in the presence of other people. They're going through what you're going through is so powerful, but
Yeah.
also terrifying to step into that group for the first time. I know how I felt, going into the first meeting. What were those like for you?
Yeah, I had some of those same reservations of like, what am I going to have to do or say, or what are people going to know about me? And I walked in, and within like the first 15 minutes, I was like, oh, I'm home. I was like, this is exactly the right place to be. And these people understand me and get me. And it was so instantaneous. It was such relief, really, in that particular experience. And my therapy experiences were similar. I went into those with a bit more trepidation, honestly, because it was one on one. It wasn't I could sit in the back of the room and not say anything, but I still had that sense of what's it going to be, and I'm kind of terrified. And then I went in and I was like, "Oh, you're here because you want to help me." And there's this shared recognition that life is hard and we can't do it on our own. We need help sometimes.
Yeah. Yep. I was terrified in my first Al-Anon meeting that I sat in, and then once it started going, I didn't even say anything, and I was just like tears were streaming down my face because I felt such a relief of that I wasn't alone anymore. I
Yeah.
think that's a huge part of it. And then what also comes out of that is a tremendous amount of first vulnerability to start to have those conversations that then become very intimate real fast, which is I think what we, decided we were going to come together to talk about today.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know as a intimacy, I was telling you this earlier, when I think about intimacy, my first thought is always in the relationship with my wife. Like that's where I think about it, like romantic intimacy.
Mhm.
So I'd love to know for you, when you think about intimacy, is that it? Is it broader than that? How do you define it?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that that's the first place that your mind goes, because I think it's the place that most of our minds go, because we've made intimacy a euphemism for sex. And so we think about it as the thing that we have with a romantic partner. It's an intimate relationship. We got intimate. We've codified that. And to me, it's so much more expansive. Like, yeah, that to me is the pinnacle. Like, there are special relationships, whether you're monogamous or polygamous. Like, it's one or more relationships where you can experience that kind of intimacy. But there's so many other ways. There's having emotional intimacy, and we're even having a little bit of that right now. We're sharing things about our experiences in some really maybe challenging times of our lives. Like, I see you as somebody who's gone through struggles. I can tap into, even though we haven't named maybe specific emotions, there's a level of emotional intimacy in that conversation. And you can have that with a friend, you can have that with a coworker, in the right context. You can have that with your kids. And there's a whole other host of intimacies. There's experiential intimacy, going out and exploring something with somebody. Like, you learn things when you're like, all right, we got to find our way. I'm thinking of first date I went on with my relatively new partner, and we got lost in the woods. We're hiking near her house, and I thought she knew the trails really well, and maybe she did, but we got talking, and I'm just like, well, we should go that way. And then we're off, and we realized, like, we didn't know where we were. It turned into like a 4-hour date, which was fantastic. But we had experiential intimacy that built up there, where we got to see each other in these moments of uncertainty, and how do we respond? And there's other types of intellectual intimacy, when we kind of geek out on stuff with people, and that can happen in all sorts of relationships. So it's really a much broader set of skills than just what you might experience with a romantic partner.
Once again, you have expanded my mind with a relatively simple concept of adding adding a word in front of intimacy. And as soon as you started going through those examples, I was like, oh my God, of course. Of course. I love emotional intimacy. That was a great one. Experiential. Now my brain's kind of like, there's got to be all these other ones too that I'm not thinking
Spiritual.
about. But yeah, but maybe I use a different word to describe them. Like for me, I think I talk about like vulnerability and authenticity a lot, which maybe feel like they're two words that go kind of hand in hand with those more intimate moments. It's like, what happens at the surface. And then like once you get down below that, you're kind of wading into varying degrees of intimacy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are skills that kind of weave together. We have to be vulnerable in order to get intimate. I was listening to a podcast a couple months ago that was talking about vulnerability, because that's the kind of geek I am. And the person was sharing. I can't think of the podcast. I think it was Unfuck Your Brain, uh, which is fantastic podcast. Kara, I can't think of her last name. Really good stuff. But she was talking about vulnerability as, it's not just sharing private information with another person. It's sharing things that could hurt you. It's sharing where you might have shame. And
Mm.
like, shame and intimacy, shame and vulnerability, like there's a really rich stew there around all of those places. And I think those are some of the really hardest places for men to go. It's why I'm so excited to be sitting here in the conversation with you and your audience, is that one of my biggest goals is for men to see models of, it's okay to be these full human beings that have fears and shame and guilt and can go into vulnerability and intimacy. It's so freeing, but it's also so scary.
Yeah, for sure. What helps you get over that initial fear of being intimate, putting out those things that might hurt
Mm.
you?
It's taken me years, and I'm continuing to work on it. I didn't really know how to be intimate, and the way I described it to some friends of mine was that, like, I trust everybody right away out to here, but, like, getting up to here is really tough with me, which was the way I could conceive of it. This is probably 5, 6 years ago, of I'm afraid of intimacy. I don't wanna let you in because you might hurt me. And so I practiced intimacy. This is actually with my improv troupe. It's me and 5 women, which made it easy because they were all up for it. And so one of the things that I would encourage for, if there's guys out there listening to this who want to build skills towards getting to intimacy in their relationships, where are the safe places that you can do that? What are the ways that you already know how to do it? I think of, my kids were a great place for me to develop my intimacy skills because I could be myself with them. And a lot of, you used the word authenticity before. I think intimacy and authenticity go really well together. Like, when I'm just being me, I can be intimate. I can share anything about me with you. So, like, what are the low stakes relationships where you can identify the opportunities to practice the skills you already have? Because I guarantee you have some skills, you just maybe aren't using them as much. And building the muscles in those low stakes environments helps you then get ready for the higher stakes.
So let's say that somebody can identify a couple scenarios in their life or spaces in their life where they're okay. This is safe enough. I'm willing to let my guard down a little bit to try on this idea of intimacy. You mentioned skills. What does that even look like?
Honestly, it looks like honesty. It's being able to, some of it is emotional literacy. We have to know how we feel in order to really tap into intimacy, because oftentimes that's where it's coming from, is like, I'm going to share the thing that's hard. That's what's building, trust and intimate connection. um, it's certainly through emotional intimacy. So if I don't know how I feel, well, how do I figure that out? Meditation, going back to one of the things we talked about a little bit before, is a fantastic way to start to get in touch with emotions. Having conversations about your own emotional vocabulary. Is it just mad, sad, and glad? Is that all you've got? Cool. There's some tools. There's wheels of, it shows you the different versions of emotions. Like, mad, is that angry, frustrated, furious, enraged? Getting some vocabulary with those building blocks can then start to get us ready to have a more intimate conversation. And I think the other one that I've used a lot lately in a lot of different ways is a technique that I learned from a colleague of mine. She calls signposting, and just
Hmm.
naming it, just saying, you know, I'm I'm having a moment here and I'm not really comfortable and I'm not even sure what to say to you right now. Like, that's a vulnerable and intimate thing to say without saying actually anything, but just saying, like, I'm having something going on right now, and I want to take some time with that.
Yeah, what's coming up for me in this moment is it feels straightforward to me that the moments of honesty and authenticity that you could share with another person that are
Mhm.
what's the word I'm looking for? Additive, generative, non-triggering. Yeah, non-triggering is what I'm going for. What
Yeah.
about in the moments when the authenticity or the honesty that you want to share might hurt the other person? Like, does that cross into something else that isn't intimacy, or is that part of intimacy as well?
I definitely think it's part of intimacy. And the way to have those harder conversations, I think, is to make sure that you've found safety first, or like, what are the conditions where we can have, you use the phrase safe enough, which I like to use when I facilitate, is like, I don't want to create a safe space where nothing happens. I want to be safe enough where we can push.
Mm.
So how do you do that in your relationships as well, so that you can have disagreements and, out and out fights, if that's what is required to get to intimate connection? because if there's a disagreement going on, there's energy, there's something you both really care about. And how can you make the conditions such that you can engage in that to a point where it is generative or connective instead of divisive? And I think one of the tools and techniques that I use, I've taken this from my coaching training, what we call designed alliance, and literally having a conversation about what are the parameters of our relationship, what's okay, what's going to work for you, what's going to trigger you, how do we respond in these situations, and my experience in life, anyways, has been that people don't often have those meta conversations to design their relationships. So you can then get to those hard conversations when they come up and know that we can come back and we can get back to a grounded place. We've got a foundation to work from.
And are there certain areas of relationships that people should or could hone in on kind of first to get started, knowing there's a lot of different aspects, but like maybe a couple that give you the best bang for your buck, if you will?
I would start there actually, that designed alliance conversation. And that can start with what are we wanting out of this relationship? And we're actually going to name the relationship as an entity. Like there's me and you, Jim and Adam are two perspectives. And then there's the relationship between Jim and Adam. Like if we name that as an entity between us and we give power to that relationship, we say, here's what we want out of the relationship. I think that's a beautiful place to start because you can see like how well aligned are we? Oh, we both want to have a friendship where we get to challenge each other intellectually, bust each other's chops, and you know, bring more good into the world. Cool. We know we're on the same page. Doesn't mean we're always going to agree, but we can always come back to that. How is that, fostering the relationship that we want to have? And if it's not, well, maybe somebody stepped out of bounds. Great. Now we can call that and we can maybe redesign the relationship too. That design alliance or design relationship isn't one and done type of thing. It's a continuous process. But how do we set that baseline, agree on what we want, and then continue to refine over time? Because we're always changing. We always need to make tweaks.
It's a powerful idea is that it's continuous. It's not a one-time thing. You don't sort of set it and forget it. Although
Mm.
being a millennial, I would love to set and forget as many things as humanly possible. But I certainly haven't had much success in doing that with relationships.
Yeah, one of the other things that I talk about a lot, and it comes up a lot with clients and coaching, especially, is people want balance. Like I want work-life balance. I want better balance with my hobbies and my family or whatever. And I just try to encourage people to get rid of the word balance from their vocabulary and just make it balancing because it's you move one thing and something else moves, and so it's always a balancing act. We don't ever get to stasis where it's like, okay, good, it's all set now, I don't have to do anything ever again. And that mindset, like when we think like we can achieve balance, we've just set ourselves up for failure. We've said, okay, there it goes again, and we can be hard on ourselves. And instead, like balancing is much more fluid. It's the way that the way I think the universe works.
Yeah, wow. That's the way that you just put that is fantastic because I was having a similar discussion with my mom a couple weeks ago about the word balance. She's like, I can't do it, Adam. The balance doesn't work for me. For her, it made her think about it in like a mathematical way, whereas it's
Mm,
an equation, and that she's more on the kind of creative side of
yeah.
things than the analytical. So that was her reasoning for it. I was like, I know balance still works for me, but the way that you just put it around balanced implies that there is this equilibrium state that once reached, everything is great as opposed to this continuous one. So the word that she likes is harmony. So she defaults to
Mm.
harmony. Like, how can I find more harmony in my life, which to her feels more, creative and fluid. So it's funny how the words end up mattering a lot too. Somebody could say, explain it one way, but use a different word. And you're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense now.
And that's a perfect example of what I was just saying with like designed alliance. Like you just had a conversation with your mom where you got into the right terminology or used the right metaphor that helped you understand like how do we want to have this conversation. And now we're on the same page, and maybe that opens up the ability to get into some of the deeper stuff that's going on for her and have a more intimate conversation.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that real quick because I think that in a lot of our relationships, especially now, there's so much just really good stuff on the surface, whether
Mhm.
it's politics or the weather or what's happening on reality TV or the stupid thing somebody did on social media or the latest uh, inappropriate men's scandal that's happening and is appalling. How can we, make sure that we've got enough space to talk about that stuff, but also clear that away to get into the real meat of our relationships?
I think for me, it comes down to, are we having conversations about principles, or are we having conversations about personalities and current events? And not to say that personalities, current events, like, what's the latest thing you're watching on Netflix that's cracking you up or making you think, like, that's great. And I always want to get down to principles. Are we talking about, how is that going to lead us to more kindness in the world? How are we going to get to a more loving society? How are we going to heal relationships? There's so many divides in the world today, and those topical things can just be lightning rods. And when we focus on those, it's so easy for the divides to start, for the triggers to get tripped. And ultimately, at our core, like, we all want to just love more. Like, literally, we want to love ourselves, we want to love each other, we want to, love the experience that we're having. And I don't think we're talking about it enough. I think we shy away from things. And I think this is, in particular, I think there's a little bit more for men around this in our culture. Like, we can't talk about love. Like, that's taboo. Bullshit.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I've been experimenting more and more with telling my guy friends that I love them or signing off an email with I love you, less to provoke some type of response and more because it's what I feel. When earlier before the show started, we were talking about all the people that we've met during the pandemic that we've never seen before in person. And, as I told you that I wanted to bring everybody together in person for an event. And really, if for the only reason is just to go and hug everybody,
Exactly.
like physically have that connection.
I want to give you a hug because I love what you're doing, and I want to share that in a way that feels right to me. And that's, like, I'm a hugger. Like, I want to let you know. I want to celebrate you.
Yeah, we'll have to start like a hug fest. I think the question will be like, do you have to present your vaccine certificate to get into Hug Fest, or like, are we just gonna take everybody's word for it?
Yeah, maybe that's after herd immunity, and then we don't have to worry about the paperwork.
Yes, exactly. Well, I want to go back to one thing that you mentioned earlier around some of the challenges that get in the way of guys for getting into intimacy. And I know in the past you've called it, the armor that
Yeah.
we wear. Talk a little bit more about what that means to you.
Yeah, the armor concept to me has come up in a few different ways. Some readings that I've done, some teachings, and what I've experienced personally, and I'll go from that, is that I grew up thinking that manhood was a certain way. I grew up in a single family house. My mom raised me with my sister, and my grandmother was another big figure in my life. I didn't have a lot of male role models, so I made it up. Nobody was telling me what it was like to be a man. And so a lot of my training as a man was implicit. I was just interpreting the world around me. And what I saw was, you had to be a certain way. You had to be stoic. You had to have this bravado. You couldn't really show emotion or weakness. And for me, I grew up a sensitive kid. Like, I'm really in touch with feminine energy as well as masculine, but I've always had that sense of, like, I want everybody to get along. I want to sit back and listen. I want to be loving. Like, things that we assign as feminine qualities are assigned to women or female identified people. And because I felt that was unsafe, because it was unsafe. Like, as soon as I got to middle school and the sorting out of girls and boys really became stark, it was like I was called a pussy, I was called a fag, right? I was called these horrible names, these things we should, I don't like to really use them, but I just want to highlight, what was going on for me. And it was like, the reaction was, shut that shit down. Like, don't show that, because you're gonna get, your head kicked in, or you're gonna get ostracized. And so that was the first layer of armor. And then over time, it just continued to build up. It was in high school in athletics, it was in college, and, like, if you weren't chasing girls and, and having certain, success there, which was totally my case, and I felt like shame, and I felt like I wasn't man enough. As you get into the work world, and I was in the corporate world for 25 years, there's all of the same message, and it just gets louder and louder and louder, and the stakes get higher. And for me, it just weighed me down. And that's when you asked, like, have I always had this sort of awareness that you've seen in me? And no, because like I was hiding behind all this armor. I didn't dare show myself. I had this big facade around me that said, like, I'm a guy, I've got it all together, I'm a professional, I've got this status in the world. And it was so stressful. That's what brought me into therapy. It's what got me to a place where I couldn't, be in my marriage. It was really, I was trying to carry out all these expectations that I understood society to have for me instead of just being myself.
Yeah, when I think about armor, I obviously think about knights and like, the weight of all that metal armor. And it's not like that was designed to wear all the time. It's like,
Right.
you're going to go to battle. Okay, great. That makes sense. Are we going to battle every single day, all the time? No, but guess what happens is when you're wearing that stuff all the time, your body starts to think, oh, I'm going into battle all the time and I've got to be hyper vigilant and prepared and ready for this. And that takes a toll on us.
Yeah, and if our beliefs are the only way for me to maintain my safety in the community and community of men, whatever community you're in, is to wear the armor all the time, yeah, we're going to get worn down. I think it's happening all the time. I think that's so much at what is at the root of all of these stories. You're referencing like the latest scandal about a guy abusing his power in whatever way. I think that is absolutely a big piece of that.
What have you found that helps you, or maybe guys that you've coached, kind of start to take pieces of that armor off or not wear it all the time or as much?
Um, Couple things come to mind. One is if I can laugh at it, then it makes it a lot easier. If I can look at it, and I can't do it in the moment, I got to be removed from it a little bit. If I can look at how ridiculous that I'm being, of like trying to control a situation that I have no business controlling, that's helpful. And I can use some lessons that I've learned along over the years of, where do I have control? Where do I have influence, and where do I have concern? And I can start to plug things into one of those circles. And really, I have control over very little. And so I might want to have some armor around the things that I can control. That might be the time to put the armor up, because I want to control, how safe my kids are, or how safe I am. But everything else, I can start to say, well, is it time for me to surrender here? Can I let go of this a little bit? And ultimately, the other thing is really, and I don't know how to say this succinctly, but I just had to be okay with myself. Like, I had to do a lot of work on self-love, like just accepting myself for who I am and not caring. Because then there's no need for armor, because you can't hurt me because I love myself.
I'm just going to let that one sink in a little bit. Yeah, that's that one hits hard, I think, is to think about love as the ultimate protector almost. It's like a protector, it's a conduit, it's a conjoiner. And I know that you've got a big mission in life around love. Where did that come from? And what is it?
So my mission is simply world love. And it came from I was in a workshop with my friend Mitch Anthony, who's just a fabulous guy. I've learned a ton from, and he was doing a branding workshop that I was attending, and he was giving me an example. He was encouraging us to come up with, like, what's the short phrase that captures the mission that you have? And he was talking about a meditation teacher who was in one of his previous workshops, and how he had said that his mission was world peace. And Mitch was questioning him, and he's saying, so tell me, like, you run like this small meditation studio, how is that going to create world peace? And he says, well, I feel like if everybody meditated, then we would have more peace, and that would lead to world peace. And I thought, that's awesome. And what's better than peace? Love. I'm going to go higher. Because I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think since it's love, I'll say it's okay that I'm wanting to one up that. But like, yeah, like, we get to go through this existence once. How do we love best. And I think it really has to start with ourselves, because if we're in a place where we're rejecting ourselves, we're ashamed of who we are in some way, that bleeds out everywhere else, because now we're putting on armor to protect ourselves. We can't open up to other people. We can't be there to meet them in those places in between where intimacy thrives.
Mm. I talked to a guy yesterday, first time I had met him, and we got intimate real fast in what we were sharing with each other. And he was telling me about when he told himself that he loved him, and what that experience was like for him. And I had a similar experience when I wasn't in a great place and was able to look myself in the mirror and say, you know, I love you. Is your self-love, self-compassion practice something that you're regularly working on? Like, are you always in love with yourself? What does that look like for you?
That's an awesome question. Am I always in love with myself? I'd love to say, yeah, 100% of the time I'm totally there. That'd be amazing. And on balance, yes. In moments, no. There are still times when my fear comes up, and I firmly believe that fear is the opposite of love. It's not hate. Uh, it's when we're in fear that we're not being in a loving place, and I still get fearful. I worry about lots of things, and um, when I can love myself, and I can come back now from like to a place of like, oh man, I was in that place where I was being fearful, I was being difficult, I was creating disconnect in my relationship, and I can still love that part of myself, because I can realize it's like I'm still integrating a piece of myself that hasn't quite caught up to that love train, that it's some old part of me, probably it's still some like fragment of armor that I like to think I've put it all down, and that's bullshit too. It's just another piece that I'm still working on dropping, and sometimes I pick it back up. And I can love that too, because I can see that like it's probably a part of me that's still trying to protect myself from a place I don't feel safe, a place that I'm not ready. And that's okay. Like I don't have to get it right. I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to be perfect. Um, and that's probably the best way I can love myself, is like, yeah, it's easy in the moment when like I'm having an awesome day or I've just done something that I feel really great about. Super easy to love myself then. How do I love myself in the times where I feel like, oh man, I screwed that up? Like I love him too.
I love him too. Yeah, that's so sweet. It makes me think a little bit about a conversation with my wife yesterday around sleep. And we're walking, and she's like, yeah, I wish that there was a way. We're talking about sleep debt. She was like, I wish there was a way that you could store up your sleep. And so that when you need it, you could just like, take the little sleep orb and be like, sleep. We were kind of, joking about how in video games, like you just walk around, grab the apple, like save it up, put it in your backpack for health later on. But the self-love is another one of those great ones. It's like, man, I wish I had like a little reserve of self-love in there that I could just, shove into the arm or straight into the heart to be like, all right, dose that thing up. So I wonder, do you have any equivalents for that isn't obviously, injecting yourself in your heart with a reserve of self-love?
I haven't come up with that one yet. First of all, when you said sleep debt, I thought I knew where you're going. I was like, oh my God, love debt. Like that's a great concept.
Ooh, that is a great concept.
Where's my love debt, and what do I need to do to pay that down? Because I think if I think of it through that lens, it's like, what is my love debt right now? Like, what have I not given myself? What have I not availed myself to? And sometimes it's not what can I give myself, it's what can I avail myself to. And that means asking for and opening myself up for love from somebody else. Again, kind of coming back to intimacy, is like, how do I let people know that I could use some more love right now? Like I really need something that I can't provide myself. That's probably one of the bigger ones for me, because it's that same soundtrack that I listened to for most of my life, of I have to be fiercely independent. I have to just do it all by myself. I don't have any needs. Don't worry about me. I got it. Except I was starving on the inside. I was building up this massive love debt. And so now the work for me is more often, I mean, the things I talked about earlier about meditation and self-care, whether that's physical or spiritual or mental, those are self-love habits as much as they are anything else. And they're never enough. I can't do it myself. Like we are, you know, we're wired to connect. I believe that really means we're wired to love, and we need that interchange with other people. And so my work is really asking other people to help me with my love debt and being willing to help them with theirs, of course.
How do you go about asking for love? What does that look like?
Oh my God, it's so hard.
Right. Correct answer.
I mean, that's a vulnerable space to step into, is because oftentimes for me, it's saying to somebody something that I'm really uncomfortable saying, and saying like, I can't handle this right now. You know, I could just use a hug. I could say that to my partner. Like, I just need you to listen to me right now. Or one of the hardest ones for me is like, I just can't do that for you right now. I'm a people pleaser. Like I want to say yes to everything because that made me safe, when I was growing up. And it doesn't now, it's not a place where I'm generating, love points all the time. Sometimes I'm taken away. And like, so for me to step into any of those uncomfortable places, whether it's I need something or I need to say no to something, um, that's maybe it's a subtle way for me to ask for love. And maybe I ought to also just kind of use my earlier advice of like signposting. Like, I could use some love right now. That'd be pretty bold.
Have you ever shared that, like verbally or on social media?
No, that literally just went through my brain for the first time.
I kind of want to run an experiment and see what would happen.
Yeah, I mean, it would be dad joke-ish of me to say I love that. So I'll say that. I love that.
Yeah, perfect. Good. Well, to anybody who's watching this live or later on, if you would like to run this experiment with us and try publicly saying, asking for some support in love or asking for love outright, like let's go and do it. How do we do? Well, let's say not, we're going to go post it on Facebook or something, but can you give an example of when you've done that recently?
Yeah, without using the words explicitly, because again, they just formulated for me. But I had a moment a few weeks back with my kids. I have three teenagers. As I said, as you noted in the intro, they are ridiculous and they're wonderful people, but they're teenagers. I mean, they're not all that aware of what I need or what I want or where I'm stressed. And I asked them for some love by letting them know, like, hey guys, I've had a really tiring, taxing day. I need you guys to make dinner tonight. You guys can take care of that. I don't want to think about it at all. And they were like, sure, we'll do that. And that was really loving from them, but it felt really loving to me. And I just asked for it. And they then showed up. And and that is, again, it's on that foundation that we've built for a really long time of like having this really loving relationship. So now I can ask for it. And they're so happy to provide it. They were excited. They put together this banging dinner. They had a good time. They had music on in the kitchen. They divvied things up, task wise. I was laying on a recliner in the other room, kind of, half awake, just, chilling out, knowing that I was getting loved actively.
That's amazing. I feel like as guys, we have a hard time asking help. We have a hard time accepting help. And so the idea of asking for something that equates to love in us is like the next level of both of those. It also made me think a little bit about the love languages book that's
Yeah.
out there, is like understanding for ourselves what, without explicitly saying like, I need love right now,
Mhm.
is asking for the things that equate to love for us and not expecting those to be the same for everybody. For you in that moment, it was making dinner. And that's like an expression of love for you that filled that back up. And that's got to be different for everybody.
Totally. And I love that you referenced the five love languages. Acts of service is one of my highest rated love languages. I don't really care about receiving gifts, but you do something for me, especially something I didn't expect. That feels super loving to me. This actually came up. I run a men's group, helping guys have conversations around these sorts of things. And it came up in our call last week and again this week about the platinum rule. And instead of the golden rule, do unto others as they would do unto us, or however that old language goes. Um, it's not about treat other people the way I want to be treated. It's treat other people the way they want to be treated. Like that's the platinum version of it. And so if I don't know how somebody wants to receive love, then I'm just going to overlay and project my stuff onto them. And they might be like, cool, you gave me a gift. I don't care about gifts. Or you did something for me, but I want a gift. Having that awareness in those relationships, again, that can be part of, a designed alliance or designed relationship is how do we get to know each other? How do we get to know what lights us up and what is just kind of like, and five love languages. And anybody who's watching this who hasn't taken that, there's an online quiz for it. It's free, gives you some super easy to interpret results. And when I did it, I was like, oh yeah, totally. That makes sense. That's totally who I am. I like everything except for gifts.
That strikes me as another great key to unlock, if you will, more intimacy, right? Is that it's not about thinking that everybody is like you. It's about having the curiosity to understand the other person so that then you can create those moments of intimacy that work for them, and you're respectful of it, and then you can do the same in return, and not have people guess. I think that's one of the hard things with love, with intimacy, with our needs, is that we all just kind of go around expecting that like people are going to figure it out and like they know.
Yeah, and asking people what they want and what they need. I mean, as a coach, that's what I do like all the time. That's kind of my job. The reason there's a job called coach who asks people what they want and what they need is because people don't do it enough. And people love hearing that. And they love being able to have that space to be able to be like, oh, I get to talk about what I really want. I get to talk about what I need. And sometimes people like haven't been asked that in years, and it takes them a while. And I think the other piece of that then becomes essential in intimate conversations is like you use the word curiosity. It's like, great, start with curiosity and make sure you follow that up with listening. Like, don't be
Mm.
formulating your version of it or your response. Just like let it land. Sit there and listen to somebody and watch how much intimacy is ready to blossom then. Because man, it feels good to have somebody just listen to what you're saying and take it all in and not need to respond, or maybe sit with it, and have a beat of 5 seconds. Say, wow, thanks for sharing that. Using empathy instead of sympathy as another tool. Like, wow, I really hear what that must be hard for you, without trying to fix it.
I like that you snuck that last piece in without trying to fix it. I think that is a stereotypical guy thing that gets in the way of our listening is, oh, there's something here. I think I can help with this. Like, I got this. Can you stop talking so that I can tell you how I can fix this for you? Because like that would be great. And then the other person leaves the conversation like, I don't think they heard anything that I said. And like, I kind of don't give a shit about this this idea that they gave me.
Yeah, and it's tough because it comes usually from a good place. Like, I want to help. I want to help you with the problem that you're encountering. And so often it lands the wrong way. I think guys get surprised by that because they're like, I was just trying to be helpful. It's like you were mansplaining. You weren't actually paying attention to the fact that they didn't need a solution. They just needed somebody to be with them in an emotional moment. And that's again part of I don't think most men have been trained for that. And it can feel like, well, I don't know how to do that. And it's, yeah, I get it. Of course you don't. Like, you haven't had the invitation to do that. And if you keep noticing that coming up, like, all right, well, what's going on? Like, what could you do differently? You could still bring that same energy of like, wow, really love to help you with that. Do you need help? No, I just wanted to tell somebody. Cool.
Yeah, it's nice asking. It's like you're asking for permission to go further,
Yeah.
which is a seems to be a powerful concept that's coming up for me right now around help. Because to your point, like, of somebody who wants to be in service of others, helping isn't like, oh, I want to try to fix you because you're broken. It's like, no, I just that makes me feel good. You're doing me a favor by letting me help you, in this moment. But if you don't want it, well, then it kind of breaks down. Feels less good.
And a simple thing that I've learned from my partner is like a question that she asks all the time, and it feels so good. And oftentimes I'm like, oh, nothing. And the question is, So is there anything you need? Like, there's no assumption that I need anything. It's just a check-in of like, what do you need right now? Hmm.
Mm,
I just need a minute, or I need somebody to look at this with me because I am totally overwhelmed, or I don't need anything, but thank you. I know you care
mhm.
because you asked. That's all I
Yeah,
wanted was somebody to care, somebody to be with me in it.
I love that. I think one day I want to publish like a list of awesome questions. Just keep a catalog and like, categorize them in some interesting ways. Like in these situations, try this. Um,
Mm.
that's a really fantastic one. It's just like little shifts too in language where it's not, oh hey, what do you need help with? Which assumes that they do, but framing it just a little bit differently that takes the assumption out of it is kind of magic.
Yeah, and it's the concept of centering, which I've been learning about in a different context. But when we take somebody's input and then we make it about us, we're centering the conversation on us instead of keeping it where it belongs. Like, you're telling me about some challenges that you're having in this conversation with your mom, and I'm like, oh man, when I was talking to my mom, like, this is what I did. I've just made it about me instead of just I'll just being there like, oh wow, that sounds really tough working on a multi-generational conversation like that, especially with your mom. How are you doing? You need anything?
Yeah.
I don't.
How do you think about when to do that versus sharing a personal experience as a way to empathize? Like, is there a good kind of rule of thumb to follow?
Yeah, watch Brene Brown's video on empathy versus sympathy.
Oh, right. As
Um,
soon as you said it.
it's a fantastic, like, 2.5 minute video, and it's a primer on those two. Like, what's the difference between empathy and sympathy? And she states it way better than I do, and it's a fun little like cartoonish video. But I think my default is like what I try to default to is to just not offer advice at all. That's where I started years ago. And in recent years, I realized like I was saying I didn't offer advice, but I would share my experience or my, how I would deal with it. And that was just advice in sheep's clothing or whatever. And and I think what I've gotten better at lately is just asking the question of, would you like any input on that or my opinion on that? It's a consent tactic, which I think, the more that we get into consent conversations, the less that we step on each other's toes.
That's great. I really appreciate that. I'm going to think more about that this week. Try it
Mm.
out a little bit. All right. Well, we can always talk for hours about this stuff. I would love to know. I'm just going to keep saying love. I can't stop.
Mm.
Apparently. Parting thoughts. What is one final reflection thought that you want to leave people when they think about intimacy leaving our conversation today?
Uh, I would say I would say that we all, as beings, want to love more, and even if that's a scary concept for you, I'd ask you to invite it for yourself. And that intimacy is a pathway to love, and it requires a lot of work. It's not easy, but it's a hell of a lot better than the alternative where you're starting to build up this one of my new favorite phrases, this giant love debt.
All right. Well, I always enjoy spending time with you, and I couldn't be more grateful for the gift of time that you've given me and anybody who's going to watch this in the future or has been watching live. So thanks so much for being here today, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. It's always a pleasure. I can't wait to talk again.
Sounds good. We'll talk soon.
See you.
All right. Well, that does it for the mandate today. Hopefully, you enjoyed talking about intimacy and love and the armor that we wear as men and people in general and got something out of it. So if you did, tweet at us, comment on something on Instagram, message me. You can always get in touch with Jim on LinkedIn right here down below. If you want to learn more about Jim's coaching and the work that he does with organizations, definitely check out thecenteredcoach.com. And of course, we are always at the mandate or mandate the show.com. So thank you for hanging out with us today. It's always a pleasure. And special thanks again to Jim for being here. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday if you're here with us live, and we'll see y'all again soon.
Thanks for listening to The Mandate with your host, Adam Hoffman. It's time to do your part in raising awareness of men's mental health, shifting the stigma, and having a positive impact on someone's life. Share this episode with a friend who could use some support and post it on your social channels. Have questions or thoughts? Text Adam at 512-980-3935. Find more episodes, upcoming live shows, and life-changing resources at mandateshow.com. Your mandate is to take your mental health seriously. Be courageous, stay vulnerable, live authentically. Until next time, y'all.